You could explain to the listener what longue durée is in the context of your studies.
Of course. So longue durée in French literally just means the long term. Longue durée history kind of began really in the 1920s in France originally. And if I could use a metaphor, say you're above a hill and you're looking out onto some agricultural land, right? And you have all these fields, and every field is kind of perfectly maintained, wonderful, but you've got hedgerows, fences, etc. between each field. So they argued that this sort of represents academia. So political scientists, for example, being one field, sociologists in another, historians in another, and they don't kind of cross-germinate and kind of talk with one another in the way that, you know, our real world does. So if you're a political scientist, you might try and kind of isolate the institution, right? So, you know, the Westminster, Senate, whatever, from the society. If you're an economist, you try and isolate the economy from community. If you're a historian, you probably don't take into account these other factors. So they were trying to create a sort of multidisciplinary way of looking at the world. It's called, you know, the long-term history. They said that lots of histories kind of looks at what they term the event. So you might look at, say, World War II history, and what you do there is that you look at, you know, what happened on a specific day in 1939, what happened in a specific battle at a specific time, and you're essentially kind of noting one thing after another, right? But they say, well, okay, to really understand history, we need to kind of go deeper.
You have to have a certain amount of time available in order to study in this way, or can you apply 10 years as equally as 1,000 years to an area?
Yeah, so that's obviously a really big question. You know, let's just take Brexit for an example, just, you know, easy one. If you wanted to discuss that, I guess the way you would employ a longue durée history is to understand, well, different parts of Wales have different understandings of themselves because of their historical past. So, you know, you have the kind of north and western areas that were kind of more defended from Anglo-Saxon culture going back, you know, millennia, centuries, and that's also why they're more Welsh-speaking. You know, you have the fact that the south was lowland, had better agriculture, etc., is the reason why it was originally colonized, and then that also affects the specific sort of Welsh within British understandings. So although you might not need to kind of explain all that in detail, it's probably worthwhile to hold it in your head whilst you're discussing kind of events that are happening today.
Work, as I understand it, you make an argument that to understand the nation's economy, it's necessary to see it as part of a wider world system. So I guess we need to explain to the listener what that world system is, and to myself, because I don't know what you're referring to, and why do we need to see it from this standpoint?
Of course. So a world system, so it's world-system, is a specific kind of, well, I define it as a sort of network of, and inside that network there are political, social, economic relationships, and wealth and power, etc., are sort of contained within that. So to take it back a step, the way you'd originally look at, you know, say you wanted to talk about the history of Wales, you're kind of a bit like a scientist in his lab. You're trying to observe Wales under a microscope, separate from what you might call the background noise, right? So it's as if Wales exists independently on its own as something you can observe. Now, what world systems analysis says is that, well, Wales or Britain or wherever doesn't exist as a place on its own to observe, because the economy of Wales, as we know, didn't just develop as it did because Welsh people chose it to develop like that. We understand that there's these other processes behind it. So if we look at coal, that coal wasn't being used because the Welsh needed it, right? It was used because the wider world system, mainly really at that time, it would have been things like the US Navy. Now, how do you understand why Wales transformed and developed without understanding what the US Navy was doing, how, things like forest degradation in the UK led to the move towards coal, etc. So it's understanding that each place in the system has a job to do. And that job isn't always a positive job, and it's not always a job that the place gives to itself. Germany, for example, makes more money from the coffee industry than every country in Africa put together. Now, Germany obviously doesn't make coffee. It can't grow coffee. What Germany does is that it roasts the coffee, grounds it, packages it, and we say that's what gives it value. Now, the reason that happens is because Germany, countries like it, have said, we will buy raw coffee beans from you, but we will not buy ground coffee from you. Now, that means that if countries in Africa that, like Kenya, wanted to develop a coffee making production, then they can't sell it, or makes it much more difficult to sell. So the system, the economy in which we live isn't value neutral. There are kind of powers and tendencies within it that structure your place. So if we want to understand Wales and why the economy of Wales works in the way it does, we need to understand the job it's been given in the system.
If you enjoyed this conversation, have comments on today's topic, or would like to be a guest in a future episode of Blueprint Cymru, head over to the New Wales website, which is new.wales.